I'd like to call to order the meeting of the Finance and Personnel Committee. First on the agenda would be the roll call. Heidi, please.
Trustee Baker. Trustee Boyd.
Present.
Trustee DeLay.
Here.
Trustee Freeman.
Here.
Trustee Jacobs.
Here.
Trustee Martin.
Here.
Trustee Smith.
Here.
Trustee McDonald.
Here.
Trustee Baker. All right. I think he's somewhere, but at any rate, we do have a quorum.
Okay. First action item and the only action item, the rest of the agenda today is information only. Correct? Yes. First action item is the approval of the minutes from the last meeting on June the 2nd. I'd entertain a motion.
So moved, Mr. Chairman.
Second.
Second.
Anybody have any corrections? Hearing none, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
Let the record show that Mr. Baker's with us.
Thank you.
He had a slip for being tardy, so he's okay.
Thank you.
Alan, will you take us through the rest of the agenda?
Yes, sir. Thank you, Chairman Jacobs, and we will get through this, starting with tab 2. Information item here regarding the fiscal year 1920 status of the 1920 fiscal year. Of course, right now we're still in the middle of closing out the fiscal year 1920. A lot of information comes from the state of Tennessee before we can do that, so those numbers are not finalized at this point. I think last time we met, there was some discussion about impoundments or reversions by the state of Tennessee at that time. So as you know, and we've informed the board that we did not go through that for the 1920 fiscal year. So we're ending the year without either one of those. Expenses for 1920 were also not significantly up due to the pandemic because we were able to reallocate a lot of resources that we had around campus and divert them to other operations that needed to be done. Some of our cleaning resources we took out of the classroom when the students went home, employees went home, and was able to use those in some of our high-touch areas, some of our more needed areas on campus, and that's one example. There's many more examples with building utilities and things that go inside of buildings. No building was completely shut down. We had employees in all buildings, but we were able to reduce services in those buildings and then reallocate those resources to other places. The second item that allowed us not to incur from the university's budget an significant additional expense is because of the CARES Act funding. Many of the things we did in last fiscal year with the housing refunds, the meal refunds that we did, we were able to use CARES Act funding, the initial CARES Act funding, to do those items. The student wages that we continue to pay from March through May, we were able to use CARES Act funding. And also, much of the technology that was provided to the students in the form of headsets or laptop loaners and stuff like that, we were also able to use the CARES Act funding for that. So in closing, we do anticipate having some one-time carryover funding because at year end, once we get the books closed, just because we did close most of the operations or a significant part of their operations after March. So much of the activity, not all the activity, but some of it during those last few months, we were able to, I believe, create some savings that will fall out into carryover funds that we would recommend holding in a reserve fund till we see what happens this fall. We've got, as we open up, we've still got some decisions that are being made. There's also the state level. We don't know what's going to happen with state resources. The impact on the state was significant and continues to be significant depending on what happens with the virus. And then, as you heard from the athletic director, with football or any sports, there could be resources, there one way or the other. So we need to plan for, a long-term impact of this virus rather than just taking any reserves and allocating them somewhere at this point. So we would reserve those and then use them as needed as one time. They're one time, they're not recurring funds. They would just be one-time funds. So I won't have any more updates on that until we're able to close the books out, and then the audit has started as well by the state auditors, so they're working on that at this time. So I'm happy to answer any questions you may have on the fiscal year 1920. Okay. If no questions, I will go to tab 3. And as I alluded before, the CARES Act funding did provide several buckets of funding. Each area had its own requirements, strings that the federal government put on how you could spend that funding. And if you'll look, it was in your materials, pages 15 through 21 gives you the detail and all you need to know about each one of those buckets of funding. But if you go to page 22, it summarizes each of the funding sources that we were provided. So if you look at that alone, you'll see that the university was awarded $19.7 million to date through the CARES Act, one of the CARES Act funding, which includes the CARES Act funding that went through the state of Tennessee, what they call the Governor's Emergency Education Relief Fund. That was added in as well. As of July the 27th, we have spent $10.8 million of that. Most of that was spent in the emergency student aid area because the intent of the CARES Act funding was to get money, scholarships into the hands of students, which we did very quickly. We have, since July the 27th, provided additional funds to student accounts. There was a small amount of funding left there that we were able to apply to student account receivable balances right before the fee payment deadline. So that has been done. So those numbers will go up a little bit at this time. The remaining technical or purchases are in process. We have many of those in process right now. Some of those invoices have come in and we're making payment against those. We've spent, most of that has been spent in the classroom and for faculty, giving them the equipment they need to teach courses either online or in the classroom. So we've implemented several initiatives there, and those initiatives are going on. So those numbers will go up as we get those payments processed. And as you know, there's another round being discussed in Congress. Thought maybe by the time this meeting, some of those decisions would have been made, but I think that's going to get delayed, so right now we don't have a lot of information on what that will look like. We're following that very closely, and then we would update the board on any information as soon as we get it on the additional, I think it's called the HEALS program, higher education program that would be subsequent to the CARES Act funding. So that is all I have on that. Any questions?
I have a couple of questions, please. On the page 22, you referred to
Yes.
the institutional portion, the $2.8 million that's been spent. Is that essentially the classroom capture piece of the page 18?
No, that would be, because a lot of those invoices probably haven't come in. The majority of that is going to be the housing refunds, the meal refunds, and the student wage payments that we made in the
Okay.
spring. So those were pretty large numbers.
Well, I mean, some came from the emergency aid, and then some is going to come from the institutional piece?
Well, the amount that was done out of the student emergency aid was, you had to put the credit on the student's account, so it went straight to the student.
Right.
Okay? So that was done through their student accounts. It really doesn't hit, in essence, the books of the university like that, like a grant. So this one, you will see actual payments for the housing refunds, meal plan refunds, and student wage payments. That all came out of institutional. And those were actual refunds of something a student had already paid in the first two.
Okay.
The emergency relief funds, if you look on the pages before that, those were based on a calculation, working through Deb sales area and financial aid, of how much, a flat amount that was awarded to students, undergraduate and graduate, whether you got Pell, whether you got Next Step, and so forth. So those were flat amounts. And that was the student emergency funds. That was that bucket. And then the institutional portion, most of the 2.8 million is the housing, meal refunds, and the student wage payments, which I believe comes up to about 2.5. The additional part of that would have been loaner laptops, hotspots that were provided to students.
So I guess I'm thinking the housing refunds from the institutional portion and the housing refunds that came from the student emergency aid weren't double dipping. They were, some were the student
Well,
didn't get, I mean, I don't understand.
okay. The amount from the student emergency funds was not related to housing or meals or anything like that. It was based, institutions by the U.S. Department of Education were given a discretion of how do you want to award this to your students. When they came up with our award amount, they came up with it based on the number of Pell students each institution.
Right,
had.
I understand the
Okay.
students got a flat sum.
Right.
But bullet A on page 16 says it is for food, housing, course materials to the students.
Right.
And then we've got food, housing, and course materials to the students here. And I'm just trying to figure out which part, how
Right.
that was divided between the two parts.
Right. Well, the first part, the student emergency aid, was not directly tied to any expense. I mean, it says what you can do down here. And they would have had an expense from January through March. Part of their housing was used. They did use their meal plan and stuff. So even if an undergraduate student got $500, that didn't cover
Right.
their actual cost.
Okay.
The refunds we did under the institutional portion would have been from March until the end of May that they had prepaid on their housing, and then we gave them a partial refund on that. We did not give them a full refund, and that was directly related to what they had paid.
Okay.
So-
And then we've got 1.2 million in our back pocket for use later.
Correct. Yes, 1.2. What we would do if, as we get a few months up into the semester, we know the items already listed there are approved items that we can use, so we would probably go back into those categories and see where we might need it the most. If we needed it in, unfortunately, refunds again, we would put it there. If we needed it, in other technology that would continue to help us with online activities, we could do that. So, but yes, that 1.2 is reserved, for use as we go forward.
Okay.
Alan, on page 15, in the second paragraph, how do you interpret the last sentence, I guess? How do you interpret that where it says, that the state must maintain support. Does that mean they're guaranteeing us the floor for
No.
these future years?
No, you're on page 15 and the,
As a condition of receiving the GER funds, the state must maintain support for elementary, secondary, and higher education.
yes, what that does, it will not let a state, by receiving these funds, the state cannot just automatically cut our appropriation.
Right, so it
Below
maintains
a
it.
certain level.
Oh,
It's not exactly the level we are. They can go down some, but they can't just, if you get 10 million over here, they can't just automatically cut 10.
but basically, they did set a floor.
Right, right. And they
For
did
us.
that in 2008, 2009 as well.
Okay.
So, and they've always looked at that, yes,
So that gives us some protection
yes,
that the funding is going to be
right,
there.
right. They cannot replace
Yeah.
the state
Okay.
funding with this kind of funding.
Okay.
Okay. Nothing else on tab 3. We'll go to tab 4. Update on the 2021 budget. On page 25, you should have received a campus email that went out from Dr. McPhee on July 1. That was shortly after the passage of the state budget by the General Assembly, alerting what actions had taken, and I'm not going to read through those, what funding we did receive or retain in the budget, and then what items were removed. And as you know, items removed were any higher education new funding, including salary increase funding. But we did retain some capital maintenance funding, and we did retain some one-time funding of $1.2 million for the Meharry project. So those remained in there.
They eliminated all the capital project money, except they did let 2 get through, didn't they?
Yes,
Oh, that's correct.
yes,
But they cut everybody else's.
But everybody
yes,
else.
there were 2 projects that,
And they bonded our funds for the concrete and construction building.
Yeah.
So that
Yeah.
we can move forward with.
yeah, on our concrete building, they were going to take that funding out of the capital fund at the state. That's how it was approved last year. So this time they moved it and said we need to be able to borrow GO bonds with that. That has no effect on us. It's just the state, I think, decided they needed more cash reserves. So they said that could free up $40,000 in the capital fund if we say we're going to borrow that to give us the money for that project. So,
Okay.
as you know, like I just said, there was no new appropriations. As the board approved in May, there was no increase recommended, and the board approved no increase in our tuition rate, so there will not be any new tuition dollars coming in from a tuition increase. But if you look on page 27, you'll see the university still has needs going into a fiscal year that we must cover. In the past, we would cover from new appropriations or new tuition dollars coming in. This year, it comes up to about $6.6 million. You'll see each item listed below. This is our normal format that you usually see in May. Many of these are fixed costs that we must cover. We did lose $1.6 million in the outcomes formula, so we add that together and it's about $6.6 million. And what that will mean is for us to reallocate that funding from another source to cover that, it'll be about a 3.38% reduction in the base budget of our academic department or all our units out there. So we're working on that with each division, with the provost and each of the vice presidents to look at their areas, see what impact that would be. And, we're still tracking that to see what is, but everybody has been working on that for several months, all the way down to the department head level. and has been working with the provost and the VPs.
I want to add that this is not going to be across-the-board cut.
Right.
We are going to be very strategic in looking at programs that are growth, or have growth potential, and those that are struggling. We certainly will be prioritizing as part of our strategic plan and using the guide there. We have never done an across-the-board. We don't believe in that. And I made that pretty clear to the deans and department chairs a few weeks ago when I met with them and told them about our situation.
Yes.
Now here, Alan, on this schedule, the new academic programs, is that the art program that we just approved?
No, that's not in there yet. I believe this one has the physician assistant program these would have been programs that were approved last year that are now starting this fall. So physician's assistant was one of them. There was an aerospace position in there, I believe. And
That means your time is up.
okay.
You're okay.
Oh,
You're okay.
No, just kidding.
so and I didn't write the other ones down, but we can get you a list of those. They
No,
would
that's
have
okay.
they would have been in I believe the May materials. We would have had them.
It was mainly
Yeah.
the physician assistant.
Yeah.
Several expensive positions.
Yes.
Chairman Jacobs, that goes to one of the questions Trustee Martin asked earlier a month ago about how are we going to support these graduate programs or these growth programs. And this is a good example of how we have targeted specific areas that, quote, will be a return on our investment.
So to that point, Alan, the new academic programs, those are startup costs that over the projected time, then they'll be providing reallocations at some point. But the first year of these, they're startup costs?
Well, these would have been based on the first year, I guess, expenses above revenues on those programs. So
This is startup losses.
yes, yes. So
But it's-
You'd hope
and
it
some-
would turn profitable.
But when we got the projections, at some point, they become,
Yes.
don't want to use the P word, but they become reallocations.
right, they could bring in more students as
You
they
can
go.
say
They
that
would.
word. What Dr. Paulson said we could use that word.
Oh, okay.
But yes,
That is protected.
That's right, I forgot. Free speech, right?
Yeah.
but yes, you're exactly right. I mean, as enrollment grows in those programs and, the expenses, there's some startup and then there might be maybe there's another position in year 2, but your enrollment has gone up. Some programs start, showing those reallocations in year 2. Some may be year 3 or 4 on those.
So, Alan, I couldn't hear you. I think you addressed this, and I just couldn't hear you. But the appropriations outcomes formula, did you say that's really not a cost, that's a reduction in revenue?
Yes, correct.
Okay.
Yes.
Thank you. I just couldn't hear you.
Right.
So, Alan, are you going to look forward in the crystal ball, or are you going to leave that to Dr. McPhee to look forward in the crystal ball 2 or 3 months?
Oh. He's got his crystal ball out, but
Okay.
We're keeping our fingers crossed. I think I mentioned earlier that there was some good news from the Commissioner of Finance, I think it was in the day's paper, Butch Early, that the tax revenues for July exceeded. But we're still very caution, we're taking great caution to make sure that we don't count our eggs before the chicken hatches. Is that right?
He's not going to give us that money.
But on the good news, and looking at that crystal ball, so far, we are holding our enrollment. I think earlier this year, we all were holding our breath with respect to what might happen with enrollment as a result of the pandemic. The good news so far, I'm looking at Dr. Sells because I've been wearing out every week to get those numbers. We had our first purge yesterday at 6 o'clock.
I felt it.
purge.
Yes, I felt it.
You felt it?
Yes.
All right. Coming from you, that's funny. And we purged almost 200 students less this year than last year. But even the better news, after that first purge, we are still up 2.67%, almost 3%, which is absolutely incredible.
It's terrific.
Yes, sir.
Dr. McPhee, Mr. Chairman, this is a little bit on that very point, the fact that our enrollment's up. 2 years ago at our summer board retreat, our very first summer board retreat, we recognized that there are a handful of students, more than a handful of students, who are this close to having enough money to stay in school and have dropped out. And so our board made a commitment to contribute in order to try to keep those people in school who are right there on the edge. We called it the Last Chance Fund. The name of it has evolved a little bit. There could probably be no more year when this is needed than this particular year. So I wanted to bring that up and remind everyone that each of us, the non-executive, non-faculty, non-student board members in the past have contributed a significant sum, and I would ask us to continue doing that.
Thank you for that, Pete.
Yeah, thank you, trustee.
And I take for granted that fund has been depleted?
No, it's been more than depleted.
Okay.
Yes,
but
sir.
We hadn't exactly, okay.
Yes, sir.
So it's time to replenish?
So we expect your check right now, trustee.
Well, you know, I like the way this board works. Steve has already got all our money for the political campaign, so he put Pete up to ask for money for the board.
Oh, so he put, I see.
This is deductible.
Oh, now he's spinning it. This is deductible. Yes, it is. It's a great program, and Darrell, I think,
I'm in, man.
leads.
You'll have my check in the week.
All right.
Last time he
That's too
said
late.
that, my check was here first.
That's right.
Got it in your pocket?
Yeah.
Yeah, they may have come get it from me.
We'll make it paperless. Come on with your credit card
All right,
authorization.
Alan, are we done?
Just pay mine for me and I'll get back to you.
That's JB's deal.
You have a last item, Mark?
We have one last
Yeah,
item. I'm going to
Kathy's
ask
in the
Kathy
house, isn't she?
Musselman to come up and do tab number 5.
Kathy, we shouldn't even bothered your day today, but we're glad to see you.
Thank you.
They're going to wipe it down, get it clean. The reason the enrollment's up, they've heard about our COVID testing program. Really drawing them in.
For the kids who don't want to be tested. What's he been drinking?
Thank you, Kathy.
Well, like Ken Paulson said, I am smiling behind this. I think this is the first time in a while that I haven't come to you asking for money. I mean, I'm sad about that, but we're not asking for money. I just have a report of our classified employee grievances for this past fiscal year. We are required by the Tennessee Code Annotated to report to the Education Committee of the Senate and the Education Committee of the House of Representatives how many grievances we had over the last year. And we had 2. One of them was a termination for cause that was upheld, and another one is still just in progress that has not been finalized yet. So, have any questions?
How many employees do we have?
2,500?
About 2,200 full-time,
It's unbelievable. That is unbelievable.
about 700 classified staff.
You need to know, Kathy, I don't know if he was here earlier or not, but Mary did ask for your money.
Oh, you did? Oh, okay. Good. No, I wasn't here during that part. Thank y'all. Thank you
Thank
for
you.
your support.
Thank you.
Let the record show that the meeting, any more discussion for this committee? Hearing none, it's adjourned
Jared.
Thank you, George.
at 2:58.